Hi, this is Anita from the Dusty Roads podcast, where we like to talk about all things to do with travel and living life overseas, or as we call, living your life as a global citizen. We believe that you can live your life as a global citizen anywhere, as long as you just care about the world, care about people in the world. And today we're going to talk about something which maybe some that have traveled have seen, is they wonder, why do some countries drive on the left side of the road? If you've ever landed in the UK or in Hong Kong or Thailand, you might wonder, why are they driving on the other side of the road? And sometimes it can get a little bit confusing, especially when you're trying to cross the road or if you're actually renting a car and driving there. I didn't realize, but there is some reasons why, and here are the 8 main reasons. The first reason was the ancient origins. The left was right. To understand left-sided driving, we go back to ancient civilizations, including the Romans. In ancient Rome, people traveled on the left. Why? Because most people were right-handed. When walking or riding a horse, it was safer and more strategic to stay on the left side of the road. That way, your dominant hand would be free to draw a sword or offer a greeting. This logic made sense, not just in combat, but in everyday safety. Passing someone on your right meant your sword hand wasn't exposed. So this practice then is stuck for centuries. Evidence from old roads like wheel ruts and Roman paths suggests that left-sided travel was the norm in much of Europe. However, over time, as nations centralized and began building new infrastructure, things began to shift. France and the United States, for example, adopted right-side driving during and after the 18th century, but some places still held on. The other one, of course, is the British factor, sticking to the left. British formalized left-handed traffic in the 18th century, and by the time the Highway Act of 1835 was passed, left-side driving was the law across the country. The British weren't alone in this, but they were one of the most influential nations to lock it in. Why didn't they switch to the right like their European neighbors? Mainly because they didn't have to. Britain was under the Napoleon influence, who is believed to have encouraged right-side driving in continental Europe. And so, basically the British were able to. So they stuck to their left-sided driving. There's also a colonial legacy. Where the British went, the left stayed. So, when you look at former British colonies, like says, India, Australia, South Africa, Kenya, Malaysia, and Hong Kong, all left-sided drivers. This is no coincidence. This is because the British were there. They established this. They kept it. The British traffic rules were often accompanied by British colonial infrastructure. Once roads, railways, and driving customs were established, they became the standard, even long after independence. For many of these countries, switching sides would be costly and confusing, so they didn't. Even non-colonial British countries were also influenced by this, such as Thailand. Thailand was never colonized. In fact, when you go to Thailand, it's one of the proud things they'll say. They have never been colonized. But they still adopted many British systems, including left-sided driving, due to the influence of the British advisors and foreign car imports during its modernization in the 20th century. Japan also had left-side driving. And this is actually different than the British. This is because of the samurai carriages and the left lane. Japan is a unique case. It was never colonized by the British, but it still drives on the left-hand side of the road. The tradition goes back to the Edo period, which was in 1603 to 1868, when samurai and other travelers would keep to the left side of the road for the same reasons the Romans did, to keep their sword hand free. Since most people were right-handed, it was a defensive necessity. When Japan was modernizing in the 19th century, especially during the Meiji Restoration, it turned to Britain for help in building railways and importing vehicles. British engineers played a significant role in shaping Japanese infrastructure, particularly by enforcing the left-handed system. So when automobiles gained popularity in the 20th century, it was natural that the Japanese continued with the left-handed driving as the British did. So even though Japan, like Thailand, was never colonized, they actually adopted it because of the British. Many say that there's practical reasons for it, convenience for left-handed drivers. Beyond historical consideration, many believe that it's more convenient for left-handed drivers. I can tell you, having driven in Thailand myself and having driven a stick vehicle and you're driving on the left-hand side of the road, it basically, it worked for me. It worked okay for me to be able to drive the stick without using my dominant hand to be able to change the stick driving all the time. It works. Somehow you just adapt with your feet, your pedals, and everything else like that. But most people are right-handed in countries where you drive on the left. The driver sits on the right side of the road. This allows a dominant hand to stay on the steering wheel. So if you don't have a stick, where you can see in America, driving a stick would be easier if you had your right hand, if you're right-handed to do it. But in other countries like this, you could see how you have an automatic car. You can really use your right hand more as a dominant hand for driving. Safety and visibility. Many people say that, there's better safety for the left. I don't know, having driven on both sides quite a bit. I am not quite sure if that's true, but there's a lot of people that believe it is. But I can tell you, once you are driving, on the left-handed side of the road, you will very easily adapt to being able to drive on that side of the road. You might ask, well, why did some countries switch? Not every country stayed consistent. Sweden drove on the left side in 1967, when it switched to the right side in a carefully choreographed national effort called Dagen H. Samoa, on the other hand, did the reverse in 2009, switching from right to left to align with Australia and New Zealand, the major car suppliers. So, sometimes some of the car companies, they change for some reason. Sweden changed because maybe, they just want to be with the rest of the world. Whereas, Samoa changed because they want to be with Australia and New Zealand, where they're getting a lot of their cars from. The changes are rare and expensive, and they can actually be quite confusing for people. That's why most countries will really stick to whatever side they started on. It's really not about right or wrong. It's about consistency. And I think here's where it comes. And this is what I said before, that when you've driven on, like I have, on both sides of the road, and actually drove a manual car, on both sides of the road, you learn to adapt, and you learn to adapt quite quickly. One way I could always tell was by the center line, that you always make sure that your center line is by the driver's side of the road. And that, because sometimes when I would be living in Thailand and coming back, and I'd look down my parents' road where there were no cars, and I'd be like confused, which side do I go on? But if you always remember that the driver's towards the center line, then that of course makes it a little bit easier. So I don't know if it makes all that much difference as far as visibility and other things go. I don't know. I'd love to hear from you guys what you think, whether it does or not. For me, I have found it, very much the same. But it is something that you need to look at and understand. But I really felt like the history of this was really fascinating as to why some countries use the left side and why some countries drive on the right side of the road. There really is no right or wrong. It's all about consistency and what the rules of the law are for that country. There are about 65 countries and territories drive on the left, mainly in Asia, Africa, and Oceania. That's about 30% of the world. So you think about that. 30% of the world is driving on the left side of the road. So most of the world is driving on the right side of the road. So that should give you some type of understanding of how much of the world is actually driving on the right side versus the left side of the road. This is Anita from the Dusty Roads podcast. We hope that you've enjoyed this. If you haven't had a chance yet, press that subscribe button. Join our community. We'd love to have you be part of us, where we talk about all things to do with global travel, or just about living your life as a global citizen. If you're interested in the world, this is the place for you to come. Thank you so much.